I'm Alex Traiman, and you're watching Jerusalem Minute, where we take you through the most important stories facing Jerusalem, Israel, and the Jewish people. As fighting continues to rage on in the south between Israel and Hamas, the northern border between Israel and southern Lebanon, where Hezbollah has used that country as a base for operations and attacks against Israel, continues to heat up. Over 1,200 missiles, rockets, drones fired at Israeli territory, both at military targets and civilian targets since the war began. There have been significant efforts to try to convince Israel to minimize its response. However, that response continues to slowly escalate, percolating toward a boil, which could spill over into a much more significant fight between Israel and Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. Benny Gantz just a few weeks ago telling United States Secretary of State Antony Blinken that at some point Israel is going to have no choice but to tackle the threat from Hezbollah. Just this week, there was a major attack, a salvo of rockets on Kiryat Shimona, which is one of Israel's largest cities in the north, not far from the Lebanese border. And Foreign Minister Eli Cohen said on a trip to the northern border this week that, quote, "There are only two options, a political solution or a military operation. What existed prior to October 7th won't be there anymore. We'll grant a certain amount of time for a political solution, and if none is reached, all options are on the table." And later that day at a press conference, Benny Gantz, who is a member of Netanyahu's war cabinet, said at a press conference, quote, "The stopwatch for a diplomatic solution is running out. If the world and the Lebanese government don't act in order to prevent the firing on Israel's northern residents and to distance Hezbollah from the border, the IDF will do it." Now, the international community, being led by the United States and their energy envoy, Amos Hochstein, who was the main broker who helped negotiate a deal in which Israel gave a significant reserve of natural gas over to Lebanon in October of last year, specifically with the idea that doing so would simmer tensions in the north and prevent an escalation between Hezbollah and Israel. That didn't work. But Amos Hochstein is now trying to, again, negotiate some kind of a political solution between Israel and Hezbollah, and particularly Lebanon, which is somewhat powerless against the terror entity which has taken control of the southern portion of their country. And remember that in 2006, you had a war between Israel and Hezbollah. And after the war, when a ceasefire was drawn up, in 2006, you had the UN agency Unifil, which was meant to be peacekeepers, which would be in southern Lebanon and were there to make sure that southern Lebanon did not become a militarized zone. Of course, we see that Unifil completely has failed in their mission, that Hezbollah has not only continued to remain present in southern Lebanon, but has actually increased the scope of military operations there, has imported tens, if not hundreds of thousands of missiles and rockets. They have over 150,000 rockets and missiles, many of them long range, some of them precision guided, that can deliver very serious payloads to specific targets in the Israeli home front. And as far as Israel's concerned, Hezbollah must be driven back all the way north of the Litani River, some 30 to 50 miles north of the border with Israel. Now, it seems like Israel has the motivation to continue to wind down operations in the south with Hamas before taking on Hezbollah in full force. And they're using this time to allow the international community to try to negotiate some kind of diplomatic solution. And the thinking inside Jerusalem is that at a certain point, these diplomatic efforts are going to prove themselves to be an utter failure. And at that time, if Israel has withdrawn many of its troops from Gaza, it will be able to redeploy for a complete escalation of this war to move from intensive fighting in the south with Gaza toward intensive fighting in the north with Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. This is highly likely over the next period of months. We don't know what it will take to trigger this type of increased reaction. And it could only be that one of the attacks by Hezbollah striking successfully a target and injuring many people, or killing or hitting some kind of sensitive target in Israel. We don't know what the trigger could be, but as both sides continue to fire at one another, increasing likelihood that the border will simmer over and that full-fledged fighting, like we're seeing now inside the Gaza Strip, will soon take hold inside southern Lebanon. An interesting development to note here regarding the threat of war between Israel and Hezbollah is that when this war started between Israel and Hamas on October 7th, very quickly after, the United States quickly sent over a USS carrier group, the USS Eisenhower, to the Middle East, into the Eastern Mediterranean. And within several days after that, also announced that a second USS carrier group, the Gerald Ford, would also be stationed in the region, all to try to deter the breaking out of full violence between Israel and Hezbollah, or between Israel and any of Iran's other proxies in the region, including even direct war between Israel and Iran itself. And now ABC News is reporting that the USS Gerald Ford aircraft carrier strike group will return to the U.S. In addition to the firepower that this carrier group has, including more airplanes than many countries have in their entire air force, this carrier group also provided significant missile defense. And if we're talking about the amount of long-range missiles that Hezbollah has to fire against Israel, there's a message being sent here that if Hezbollah begins to fire, that Israel could be on its own. This additional missile defense was very important, because if Hezbollah will start firing in rapid fire against the Jewish state, there's no amount of Iron Dome or Arrow or David Sling that Israel has that could neutralize all of the rockets and missiles that Hezbollah has in their arsenal. And they were counting on this missile defense that was being provided by these USS carrier groups and the destroyers that came along with those. Right now, the Eisenhower group has been stationed in the Red Sea area in the Gulf of Aden, specifically to try to deter the Houthis. And now the other carrier group, which was on the Eastern Mediterranean and meant to deter Hezbollah, now going back to the United States. So that does potentially change some of the calculations that Jerusalem needs to consider as to whether or not they can enter quickly into a war with Hezbollah to the north. Not only is Israel fighting in Gaza and in southern Lebanon and dealing with the threat of the Houthis coming from Yemen, but Israel has been continuing to strike inside Syria against movements from Iran of weapons and personnel toward the Israeli border in Syria, and also into Lebanon as part of this land bridge that Iran has created that moves through Iraq, through Syria, and into Lebanon, and also potentially into Jordan. And Israel has struck many times at the airport in Damascus. They've struck even as far north as Aleppo. And just this week, the IDF struck in an airstrike outside the capital of Damascus, killing a senior officer in the Revolutionary Guards. This was Sayed Razi Mousavi, who is considered one of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps' top Quds Force commanders. And he was responsible for coordinating the military alliance between Iran and Syria. And he was responsible for providing weapons from Tehran into the region to create this ring of fire around the state of Israel. He was also considered to be a longtime confidant of Qasem Soleimani, who was the Quds Force commander killed by a USS drone strike in Iraq in 2020. And not only did Israel strike, but this was a direct message to the Iranian regime that Israel has its eyes on them and holds them responsible for much of the destabilization in the region. And the Iranians took notice. Major General Hossein Salami, the chief commander of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, called for the annihilation of Israel on Thursday at a state funeral in Tehran for Razi Mousavi. And he stated, "Our revenge for the martyrdom of Sayed Razi will be nothing less than the removal of the Zionist regime. I am hopeful that soon, God permitting, the great and honorable Palestinian fighters will wipe out the geographical and political name of this evil and fake regime. Now, Iran's president, Ibrahim Raisi, he said, the assassination of Mousavi is, quote, a sign of the Zionist regime's frustration and weakness in the region, for which it will certainly pay the price. And the foreign ministry spokesperson Nasser Kanani told state media, quote, that Iran reserves the right to take necessary measures to respond to this action at the appropriate time and place. So we are seeing pretty clearly that not only is Israel responding directly to Iran's terror proxies in the region, but is bringing the fight closer to Iran itself. And this does, in fact, once again, threaten to spill this war into a much wider regional conflict in which it is very clear that this war is not between Israelis and Palestinians, but rather that this war is between Israel and Iran and all of its military proxies in the Middle East.